Super excited tonight. I've got the Honourable Mr John Ruddick joining the podcast. Thank you for your time and coming on tonight.
Matt, thanks very much for the invitation. Looking forward to having a good discussion.
Well, I really wanted to get you on because the election's been called. We've got it. We've got the date. It's not that long away, probably about 4 weeks as we record this. And for me, I really want to discuss a few different things, but there's this big movement on social media at the moment that you're probably aware of, where people are sort of pushing our smaller parties compared to voting for the majors and really pushing Liberal, Labor, Greens and Teals last. I'm really curious about what you think about that, what's happened in the US and maybe how that's impacted here in Australia and where it looks like going forward.
Okay, well, look, let's start with the US, which you just mentioned. I think Trump in his second term has a hell of a lot more authority. When he arrived in Washington 8 years ago, he really did not know what he was doing. Now, I believe he had good instincts, okay, but he sort of said, look, I'll have half of my team, my close team will be Republican establishment figures and half of them will be MAGA people. Well, all the Republican establishment figures ended up knifing him. So it was a chaotic first term. Despite that, I still think he did a lot of good. On this occasion, he's got a very impressive team around him and he's got a lot of authority. Now, he's winding back all the woke stuff, okay? And I believe that is going to filter down to the rest of the world because America still has an enormous amount of sway culturally. So I think that things will turn around on that front. Now, with the federal election, the main game for the minor parties is the Senate. Okay, so in New South Wales and all the states, in about a month from today, we're going to elect 6 new senators. Now, how it works with the Senate is, if you get about 7% of the primary vote, you're probably going to get a senator. You can get in with a little bit less, sometimes you need a little bit more, but let's say 7% of people in New South Wales or Victoria or Tasmania or wherever. So that's a pretty good system, okay? So what's going to happen in most states is Labor's going to win 2, Liberals are going to win 2, Liberals, Nationals. The Greens will win 1, so then there's 1 more left over. Now, we on the minor right, we've got about 12% of the vote across the country in all the states. On the left, on the minor left, there's the Greens, and almost all of the minor vote left goes towards one party called the Greens, and that's why they have a lot of power. They've got a lot of power here where I'm sitting tonight in the New South Wales Parliament. They've got 4 out of 42 in the upper house, and they've got a lot of sway, and they really throw their weight around. They're very diligent and hardworking. Okay, now I disagree with pretty much everything they do, but they're still, they've been a political success, and they've only got about 10% of the country voting for them. In Canberra, there's 76 senators, and the Greens have 12. If you include Lydia Thorpe, she was elected as a Green, she votes with them. She's not officially part of it. 12 out of 76 are Greens. Gives them a lot of power. Okay. Now, what we have on the minor right is we have more votes than the minor left, but because we're all full of people who think that they're going to be the future of the salvation of civilization, we're split up into about 6 parties, all good parties, all full of good people. Okay. Now, what that means is a lot of people will go out there and they'll say, I really like the Libertarian Party, but I don't want to risk an Albanese government. So what they will do is they will vote 1 Libertarian, 2 Albanese, then they'll probably vote Pauline Hanson or Clive Palmer or a Christian Party or the Shooters parties. Okay, now, but what they're doing when they put their favourite minor right party first, but then they put the coalition next, they've basically voted for the coalition. That's what they've done. So what you need to do is you do need to vote for your minor right parties. There's several good ones, and you need to put them in order. Put your very favourite one at top, and then, yes, put the Liberal National Party ahead of the Greens and ahead of Labor, because they're always going to be worse. The Liberal government are endlessly disappointing, okay, but they're better than Labor, okay, usually. There's been a few occasions where a Labor government's been okay in this country, but we're talking about very, very, very few occasions. Now, so what we're hoping to do here in New South Wales is that the Libertarians have done a deal with 2 other minor right parties, the Jared Rennick people and the Heart people. Now, the Heart people used to be known as IMOP. They were against all vaccines, okay? Now, they might be onto something after all the vaccine crap we had during COVID, but they were, they've been around for about 10 years and they, get 1% of the vote or something. But these are people who didn't believe in any vaccines. Now, they're basically running on a ticket with the Libertarians, okay? They've all got, and then there's Jared Rennick, we like Jared Rennick. We got our differences with him, but we're all on one united ticket there. So we're hoping that people can. Now, Craig Kelly is our candidate for the Libertarian Party in New South Wales. And, he's got a huge social media following and he's a really top bloke and he's been right on a lot of things before everybody else. So let's hope that, we're all working very hard to help get him elected. Now, what will happen is what we really need to do in the future with all these minor right parties. I posted an idea on social media 6 weeks ago, and I said, look, this is how we can have at least equal power to the Greens. All these minor right parties should come together. Now, won't have time to do it now, but in 3 years' time, we should come together and meet at somewhere like the Sydney Town Hall, and we invite all the members of One Nation and all the members of the Shooters and Fishers Farmers and the Libertarians and whatever Clive Palmer's up to that day of the week. And we invite them all along, and there might be 2,000 people there, all good people, all people that agree on 80% of issues. Now, Jared Rennick loves tariffs. Libertarians don't like tariffs. We've got our differences, but basically we'll be really happy if Jared Rennick gets elected. Now, although the Libertarian candidate is better in Queensland, I should point out. Now, but it goes, for all over the state. Now, what we would do is we would say to each of these participating parties, you nominate who you want to be the top of a big joint Senate ticket with all the minor right on the one ticket. So all the parties, let's say there's 6 parties participating, they all put forward their best candidate for the Senate, and we have like an American-style primary. Everyone can get up and say, vote for me. I'm the Libertarian candidate. This is why I should be top of the ticket. Ask him a few questions, him or her, and then the Shooters, the Fishers and Farmers guy will get up. Then the One Nation guy will get up. Then we have a democratic vote. Now, everyone in that room is going to want someone to win. And so we're going to vote for, some people will just vote for whatever party they belong to, but I believe that most people will vote on merit, and then we can have a big united ticket. Now, then what will happen is, because a senator is there for 2 terms, so they get in there for 3 years, but they actually get 2 times 3. So they're there for 6 years, because every state has 12 senators, and so it means every 3 years we elect 6 in a cycle. So what can happen in 3 years from now, Matt, is if we get our act together on the minor right, like they have on the minor left, we can have 12 senators too. And that'll be we can really then start to turn around Australia and benefit from what Trump's doing in America.
That is one of the things I found absolutely fascinating, because I obviously follow yourself on X, and when I saw that idea, it makes a lot of sense. I sort of sat there and went, geez, that's a smart move. I wonder how many would join, and it was interesting to see which ones did and didn't. And I know you guys were very vocal in being cards on the table. Yeah, this is what it is. But it makes more sense than having this fractured division, having this one ticket and a democratic process for you guys to pick the best candidate on merit. That makes sense to me, and very interesting. So let's talk about, let's say everything works out and the power you get the seats, and in 3 years' time, that right would you say it's a conglomerate, just a group of like-minded individuals, whatever you want to call it, would that then, how does that look in shaping? Because you talk about like the coalition is obviously Liberal and National parties that combine, and generally Labor will tee up with Greens, and I think Mr Albanese's already said that as well. So how does that look? Do you see that you have seats and someone else is joining up with you and you make sort of that coalition, a new coalition, or would that be you just have a lot more power and you stay where you are as a group, or how does that work?
Look, I don't know. I'd say we'd be a group for the election. Now, then we'd go to Canberra and we'd be, it'd be clearly, the Pauline Hanson person might be top of the ticket in, say, South Australia. And the Christian Party might be top of the ticket in Western Australia. So we'll get, then we would get 6 of these people elected every 3 years. That's assuming we don't have growth from there. But anyway, let's assume So then they would be in Canberra in the Senate. Now they're going to agree 80% of the time, but there would be no binding obligation. There'd be no. Now they might go and have an informal get together once a week before a parliamentary sitting week. Sit down and say, okay, what's coming up? What are we going to do? And they would probably talk to each other and probably cooperate, but there'd be no binding requirement that they have to vote as a bloc in Canberra.
That almost sounds a little better because there's not party lines to toe, and you're almost hoping that the person elected is going to do what is best for the country and best for the people, which I think is sort of a breath of fresh air, because you do see a lot of left and right politics. We see that a lot, and it's a very funny dynamic at the moment watching what's going on in the US and seeing that it's almost flipped on its head. And I love sort of the psychology of things and watching what's going on and seeing Teslas get burnt when they were the saving grace for the climate change. It's just flipped on its head. So it's very interesting to watch. Where do you see you guys on the outdoors? So you touched on it before. There's the Shooter Farmer Fisher Party. There's all these different sort of other right sort of leaning parties. Why is someone, and my audience is more outdoors, hunting, fishing sort of people, why are they going to look at you guys as opposed to some of the other smaller right parties like the Shooter Farmer Fishers? Because that's been a big one. I have liked a lot of stuff that they've done. I do personally feel that shooters in the name, and I've been vocal about this, I think that turns off a lot of people prior to them even looking at policies. If they look at policies, they just see shooter, people are afraid of guns in this country for some reason, and all of a sudden they're just gone. Why are shooters, hunters, fish, and people like that voting for the Libertarian Party?
Okay. So there is a diversity of opinion on a lot of subjects when it comes to libertarianism. It's a very ideological, intellectual movement. But one issue that libertarians all around the world fully agree on is the right to bear arms. Now, we believe in that, and I know that a lot of people in the shooting community don't agree with us on that issue. But you've invited me on the podcast to say what we frankly think. Okay. So we definitely believe in the constitutional right to bear arms. We don't believe this should be the right that can be taken away by politicians and bureaucrats. Now, why do we believe that so strongly? Well, there's a few reasons. Firstly, the biggest reason is that governments have a habit of, over time, using excuses to grow and becoming tyrannical. And we're halfway there right now. Still fairly free in this country, but the government's creeping. Okay, war on terror, global financial crisis, COVID. On all occasions, the government, ratchets up and they say, "Oh, it's just temporary. Once the crisis is gone, we'll be back to normal." No, ratchets it up. So we believe, and we thought what happened during COVID was absolutely outrageous on every front, and it was basically a bad flu. And I believe it was because the left was just in this hysteria and they wanted to bring down Donald Trump, and they did bring down Donald Trump through COVID. Turned out to be good. I bet they regret it now because now he's come back stronger than ever. But let's not digress. Now, so we believe that having an armed population keeps the government in check, because the government knows it can't get out of control, or the people do have a last resort and revolt. They can take to the streets. Now, that doesn't happen in a country where the people do have the right to bear arms because the government is kept in control. Now, in Australia, we had about 90% of people were fined to be treated like farm animals during COVID, and the government really did push us around because we were defenceless. We were defenceless against the government. In America, only about 70% of people took 2 of the warp speed vaccines, and but in Australia it's 98%. Well, what's the difference? The American government knows it can't push the American people around too much. Okay, so that's the first reason that we like the right to bear arms. Now, the second reason we like the right to bear arms is one day Australia, we should assume, is going to be invaded. Okay, now we could have the Australian military wiped out, but an invader is going to be really, really cautious about invading us if they think that every second home might have a firearm. Okay, so it's one thing to take out our military, but then we're all armed anyway. So it's going to deter an invasion. Okay, that's another good thing. Now, then there are, of course, personal safety issues. We don't believe that we should have to rely on the state for personal safety. If somebody's threatening our lives, we've got a right to defend ourselves. Thank you very much. And then, of course, there's lots of practical reasons. Farmers need guns and, people enjoy it as a sport. And, of course, I do feel quite strongly about preserving the Australian native bush, what we've got left of it. And I believe that feral animals, need to be taken out. Now, I know it's, I don't enjoy taking out, something like a brumby, okay, because they're highly intelligent animals, okay, and the horse and the humans have been good mates for about 5,000 years. So it's not fun, okay, but there's only one native Australian bush, okay. Now, it's really complicated, this issue with the brumbies. It's coming up for a vote in Parliament soon, and one of my votes could easily be quite an important vote on that occasion. It's not often that important, but it could be on the brumbies. So I am open-minded on that. But feral animals in general, I grew up in Tamworth, and then I worked on a farm near Moree for a couple of years before I went to uni. And I've seen the devastation that the wild pigs make, okay, and the foxes and everything. So that would be one reason why I believe that the viewers should be interested in having a look at what the Libertarian Party is about. But more generally, the other reason why people who would be liking your podcast, Matt, would be interested in our party is because we're against the government, okay? We don't just want a low government. We think the government is potentially a dictatorship and very dangerous, and it keeps meddling in all of our lives. Now, the people that watch your podcast, I'm guessing, will have experienced the government meddling, usually over nothing, usually over just bureaucratic mission creep, okay, just to sort of boss you around. And so we believe in a lot more personal freedom. We believe in taxes. Taxes should be sort of no more than 10%, okay, and we believe the government should get out of the way and the people will flourish. Now, so we look at what Elon Musk is doing in the US, where they've got a $36 trillion government debt. I don't know how the hell they get out of that, okay, but $36 trillion. And Musk is out there trying to cut all the waste, and there's a hell of a lot of waste and inefficiency. We didn't realise how much theft there was, outright theft. All the Democrats and their mates, all the pigs with their snouts in the trough, okay, on a industrial scale. Now, I'm sure a similar thing is happening in Australia. And we need to absolutely prune back the government in a big, big way. And I think that that's where a lot of us would have commonality with your viewers.
I mean, most of what you said there, I'm sure people that listen to the podcast would completely agree with, and it makes sense. And I think one of the things that has made me start to think about where I sit on these issues is because we pay a hell of a lot of tax. It's for me, it's absolutely ridiculous. Cost of everything has just creeped up. I've got 3 little ones. I'm paying $680 a week out of pocket for daycare. That's a lot of money. That's someone's significant wage a week practically. Then we start to talk about, where all that money's going. What's the reality that something like Doge and what they're doing in the States could actually happen here?
Well, there's 2 ways it can happen. The first is that the Trump administration is such a success that, public officials all around the world have to admit that this was a success. Now, that will take time. This is what happened with Margaret Thatcher, who I believe was a great Prime Minister in Britain in 1979. She comes to power. She brings in all these tough reforms, winds back the power of the government and everything else. And what that actually did is, in the short term, it created quite a sharp recession. And a lot of people said, oh, Margaret Thatcher, it's not working. She said, give it time, it will work. Now, fast forward about 4 or 5 years, and Britain was booming like it hadn't done for decades. And Britain did become an inspiration to the rest of the world. When I was growing up in the 1980s, on a not that infrequent basis, we would see on the 6 o'clock news, we would see famines in Africa, okay? Really bad famines. As far as the eye could see, the camera's got, 10,000 people with bloated stomachs and skin and bones. Why was that happening? Oh, communism, socialism, okay? Big government. Thatcher showed them how, oh, no, look, liberalise your economy, take an entrepreneurial attitude, reduce the power of the state, and voila, Africa hasn't had basically barely had a famine since then, and it's, there's when I think there's something actually happening in South Sudan now, but that is because of a war, not because of economic policy, which it was the case previously. So the first way it can happen is that the Trump administration, now it's it's going to take a couple of years, but the Thatcher reforms were so successful that when Australia elected a Labor government 4 years later in 1983 with Bob Hawke, that Labor government, basically said, "Oh, we're going to copy everything Margaret Thatcher has done," and that's why Australia actually had a reasonably good economy for a couple of decades. Now, the other way that we can bring it about is simply through growing the Libertarian Party, okay? Because we're the only party on the spectrum that has Doge in our DNA, okay? Because we could get rid of a whole ton of things. We have in this country a sex discrimination commissioner, okay? Okay, now what the hell's that for? Okay, I mean, I don't think women are oppressed in this country anymore. Some people might say that women are oppressing men at the moment. Okay, certainly the balance has gone too far. We do not need a sex discrimination commission. What the hell do they do? Okay, I'm sure they get paid high salaries, and chauffeur-driven cars and flash offices in Canberra. So, but that's just like one of a thousand. With the ABC, the taxpayers hand over $1 billion, so they can have, state-run media left-wing propaganda 24/7. Okay, well, of course that's got to go. There's a whole ton of things that we could just abolish. So we hope that it'll work. We know it'll work in Trump. Look what's happening in Argentina. I mean, if Argentina is like, Doge times 5. It's booming. Thank God for that. Good to see. But libertarians just know that if the government gets out of the way, the people will just spontaneously flourish. So it's not like we're surprised that Malay's going so well in Argentina. We knew it would happen, okay, and it is happening. All the statistics are terrific, and so we think we've got to make the intellectual case. Now, the Liberal Party has, throughout its history, generally been a pretty good party as far as parties of government around the world go. And this is why Australia is still a successful country, because the Liberal Party has run the country for most of the time since Federation. Named other things prior to Robert Menzies, but it's basically the same party all the way through. But in the last 20 years, what's happened, it's been so successful that all these careerists and opportunists and lobbyists, and they are going to the Liberal Party because they want something out of the Liberal Party. Okay, and so they now there's still lots of good people in the Liberal Party. Okay, but I think they are in decline. We see it with all these big pre-selections. What happens is when someone retires now in the Liberal Party, and the Liberal Party has to pre-select who the next candidate will be at the by-election, the media says, "Oh well, party officials have said that we have to pre-select a woman." Okay, we have to. The party polling says we've got to pre-select a woman. Okay, crap. Okay, who cares about gender? And we just want someone who's going to be good at the job. But the Liberal Party falls for it. They said, "Oh well, we've got to get with the times. We've got to, and we've got to have diversity of candidates." Okay, well, politics is an important job, serious job. Okay, we don't want to be playing little games with it, and so the Liberal Party has really lost its way. Now, what that has done is there's not much difference between if Scott Morrison had won the last election and he had governed for the last 3 years, everything that Albo's done would have been pretty similar, except for the voice. Okay, Morrison would not have done the voice. Albo did the voice. Okay, and maybe the foreign policy would be a little bit different, but not much. And there's not much of a difference between the last Liberal government and this Albo government. Now, it's bad government, this Albo government, no doubt about that. But all the inflation was caused by Scott Morrison handing over $1 trillion. Here's free money, everybody. It's like he flew a plane around Australia. Just open the windows. Here's $1 trillion in cash. Stay at home. Ebola's coming. I'm here to save you. Gee, surprise, we've got inflation. So, and the worst part about it was not just dumb Morrison, and he is dumb, hardworking, but dumb. You get the feeling the guy's never read a book in his life. Where was the Liberal cabinet? Why weren't people resigning and saying, "I can't stand by this"? No, Peter Dutton just sat down, just copped it all. No, people should have been resigning, okay, but they didn't. And so there is a gap for a really sort of on the front foot ideological party that really seriously believes in seriously cutting taxes and seriously cutting back the power of the state in a permanent and serious way.
Jumping back to something you mentioned previously, was that you talked about the right to bear arms and for invasion. And it's very interesting. I talked to a lot of different people, and their thoughts on that differ greatly. And I think Russia, Ukraine is a really good example of why it's probably something that you need to think about and have up your sleeve, because let's look at what China's doing at the moment. They are testing the waters, like no pun intended, but that's what they're exactly doing. And we sit back and see, well, both of our major political parties seem to be severing ties with Trump or saying things that our ally in the US, who is a superpower, it's starting to look a little weaker. Now, as a person, that makes me concerned, and I think more people are starting to see that and starting to take a bit more notice of that. How do you see that going in the future if the majors were to just keep going down this path and supporting things against Trump? And do we as a country get more isolated? We saw tariffs. I think they came in today. Everyone's up in arms. I'm sort of sitting there going, hold on, we do 10% to the US and they've just put 10% on us. It's like for like. I don't know why we're saying that's like not friendly and things like that, because we'd already done it. How does that look in a world where maybe we start to part from the US?
Okay, well, look, there is something that your viewers will be interested to know, that is a distinction between the Libertarians and the Liberal Party. And that is that, we some people describe us as a purist version of the Liberal Party, and that's largely accurate. So, like what the Liberal Party says, they believe in free speech, but we really mean it. Okay, one of the first things I did here when I got to the New South Wales Upper House is I proposed a motion. We had to have a debate about it and a vote about it in the chamber about having a constitutional amendment in New South Wales to protect free speech. Now, the Liberal Party says they support free speech, but of course they voted against it. Okay, but on most things, particularly around economics, we're a purist version of the Liberal Party. But a big difference between us and the Liberal Party is foreign policy. Now, we look to Switzerland as the ideal country when it comes to foreign policy and other things, okay? Most people got a firearm in Switzerland and other things. Now, 500 years ago, so it wasn't just yesterday, 500 years ago, the Swiss said, hey, we've got this really cool idea. Let's agree not to go to war with anybody. We won't go to war with them. They won't go to war with us. We'll give our people guns. We'll give our people, I think they've got compulsory, rifle training for a year or two. Okay. But let's look at that history over 500 years. Switzerland is the richest country in the world, probably. Okay. And it's a very, very free country, very low taxes. Okay. And guess what happened? No one's invaded them. Okay, so we can have the Napoleonic Wars, goes and kills, 6 million people in Europe for 25 years, leave Switzerland alone. Okay, I think there was a tiny little incursion by Napoleon, but it was over in about 2 days. World War I, swirling all around Europe, 20 million dead, okay, and everyone leaves Switzerland alone. World War II comes along, you got Hitler, Stalin, Churchill, Franklin Roosevelt, all the big names of the 20th century, all their big armies everywhere. Everyone leaves Switzerland alone. Cold War comes along, same thing. You've got the Soviet Union versus the American NATO's, okay. Switzerland's right to beat the sandwich. Everyone leaves Switzerland alone. Why is that? Because they just said, well, we're not going to go to war with you. Okay. And so now they're big into humanitarian aid, privately run, not government run, because government run aid always ends up getting corrupted and ending up in the pockets of mates. The Red Cross, the Christian Red Cross, was a Swiss enterprise set up by Christian businessmen. It's the biggest charity, the most successful charity, the most humane charity in the history of the world. So thank you, Switzerland. So what we would say is we believe Australia should be the Switzerland of the South Pacific. Okay, now we're always going to be family with the United States, because we are. We're based. They're of British origin. We're of British origin. We like each other. Okay, and we're always going to be friendly with Britain. But we would say, look, at some point, the United States has got China sort of encircled. The South Koreans are there, the Japanese are there, the Taiwanese are there, the Philippines are pro-America, Vietnam's even pro-America today, India's pro-America, Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, generally pro-America, and China's there, feeling pretty grumpy about all that. Okay, and our Western media tells us all the time, oh man, China's getting ready to attack. Okay, well, China's thinking, you've got to surround it, so that makes China aggressive, and then they act aggressive. Then we say, oh look, they're being aggressive. We've got to ramp it up, ramp it up, ramp it up. Now, I really don't think it'll happen, but it is definitely possible that sometime this century there'll be a Chinese-American war in the Pacific. In the age of nuclear bombs, we could have twice the death toll of friggin' World War II. That waste of time. Okay, so now Australia is family with America, and we're friends with China because we do a hell of a lot of trade. We make each other a hell of a lot of money. They make money out of us. We make money out of them. So I think Australia's in a good position here to sort of say, look, let's try and just sort of avoid a war here, everybody. Let's sort of we don't have to be friends, but we can be non-enemies. Let's aim for non-enemies. Okay, and so, but we used to have Albanese's left-wing Labor. Julia Gillard was left-wing Labor. They were the two prime ministers who, more than anybody, sort of said, oh yeah. Let's make the Australian military part of the American military. Let's make Australia a big aircraft carrier for America. Well, one day, Matt, America might lose interest in the Pacific. Now, they're very interested in the Pacific right now, but what if the sheriff decides he's going to leave town? Well, we're the deputy sheriff as it stands at the moment. China's going to be pretty cranky with us. So I think now it would be risky. There would be some risk in declaring ourselves the Switzerland of the South Pacific. But to mitigate that risk, we would say, well, we need to have the right to bear arms. Okay, to prevent an invasion, because we couldn't rely on America in those circumstances. And second, I'm not opposed. I'm not like ruling out support for nuclear weapons. Okay, but I think it's nice that Southeast Asia has all agreed mutually. Hey, why don't we just not nuke up? Because if one of us nukes up, the Philippines gets them, then Thailand will want them, and Indonesia will want them, and we've all got to get them. We don't want that. We could get to that point, okay, but I do think we need to think about something like missile defense, like this Iron Dome thing over our capital cities. We can't put it across a whole continent, okay, but over our capital cities, we can say, look, if you're going to send a missile down here, we're going to have about half an hour's warning at least, okay. These supersonic missiles go pretty fast. We might have 5 hours warning, but if we've got an Iron Dome, we can take them out. So we'd have to think about that. And then, we'd... That's what I think is the safest option for Australia. And I just think that the war hawks, which, after 9/11, let's think about the wars we've had since 9/11. We've had Afghanistan. Well, that was a disaster. The Taliban's back in power, lost trillions of dollars, lots of Americans dead, lots of Afghans dead, Aussies dead. Okay, bad, but lots of return veterans with, the stress, the PTSD. Okay. So, and it didn't work. Iraq, worse. Libya, it's not as big as Iraq, but that was a mega disaster. Syria, the rivers of blood in Syria, okay? And America at one point under Obama was supporting one side and the other side at the same time. It just became a mess. And now we're doing, so if that's 4 bad wars on the trot, okay, and then we decide to go and, won't it be fun to go and get involved in a border dispute between nuclear-armed Russia and aim that situation. So we are skeptical of the war machine.
A couple of things on that one. I think our position is probably a fantastic thing, being a continent that's relatively isolated. I think we have that luxury, and I think that sometimes is not just a great thing, but I think we take that for granted a little bit. It's fascinating watching the states, because you talk about USAID for me is, a lot of people think that it's for aid, and it actually stands for the United States Agency for International Development, and swaying things, and more information is coming about how they influence decisions in different parts of the world, et cetera, et cetera. So that's really interesting that some of this stuff is all coming out, and it does make a lot of people question, is it happening here in Australia? Now, going forward, so you guys have a policy, you're low on tax, that's one of the main things. What is your stance on, do we bolster the military? What is your stance on how do we get the cost of living down, because I think that's hurting everybody the most at the moment. And it's probably one of the reasons I wanted to get you guys on here, because I wanted to find out where you stand on it. And further is that we have a lot of people that might be sitting there going, do I vote the same way, or what is a decent alternative? And I really want them to consider that, because it's not just about looking at it as a hunter or a shooter. It's what's in best interest of everybody in the country.
Well, look, on the defence spending, okay, which is about sort of 10 to 12% of every tax you pay goes towards defence, federal taxes. It goes towards defence. Now, defence, of course, is necessary. But it should be for the defence of Australia. So it deters people wanting to invade us, like the Switzerland. Swiss have got good defence. Now, what we are spending an enormous amount of money to basically be a cog in the American war machine. That's what's happening. And we're not spending it on defence, we're spending it on attack. We've agreed this AUKUS thing, okay? It's about, I think, 350 billion Australian dollars, okay? That's a lot of money. And, and we're going to use submarines to defend Australia, okay? No, it's not. It's about attacking. It's about, it's helping America, okay, in all the wars around the place. This is one of the reasons the Libertarians swung behind Trump in the last election, because the war machine had really got behind the Democrats in the last few years. Now, on cost of living, okay, so it is. We used to have bad inflation in the 1960s and the 1970s, and then Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan came along and said, "Look, we got to kill the inflation, and it's going to be painful. And it's like when you're sick, you got to take some medicine. Medicine doesn't taste great, but good medicine, it's going to work." So Reagan and Thatcher said, we've got to kill the inflation. We've got to get it under control, because when it's out of control, there's so many bad flow-on effects. Okay, and they did kill the inflation, and their good economic policies gave the Western world and most of the world low inflation from the mid-1980s until COVID comes along. Okay, it went up a little bit because of all the money that was wasted to bail out the subprime, the global financial crisis banks. Okay, but then COVID comes along, and governments all around the world just thought it'd be a magnificent idea to give people free money. Okay, and libertarians were just all around the world aghast, horrified. They're saying, "Are you completely dumb?" And the answer is yes, they are. But everybody else just sat back and said, "Oh, man, fantastic! I can sit here, and I could get free money. I could get free money." Okay, and that's how it was such a bad disease. They could keep the bottle shops open. You know why they kept the bottle shops open? Right, because they thought, well, let everyone sort of we don't want them sober. They might take to the streets. We'll get everyone half pissed for half the day. So inflation is the cause of the government spending too much money and inventing money out of thin air, which only the government can do. And inflation makes the rich people richer. That's because they can handle the increase in prices and the assets go up in value. It really hurts the poor, hurts the bottom 50%. That's what inflation does. And it's caused by excessive government spending. Now, the textbook example is Argentina, okay, who basically had left-wing and right-wing governments since the 1940s, but they all believed in a big government, and they all believe. Right-wing governments can sometimes be, big spenders as well, okay, like Mussolini, okay, and many, many others. But so they had unbelievable inflation in Argentina, just chronic for years. I was there a year and a half ago, and it's like, $100 US buys you a massive bundle of Argentinian pesos. So Malay comes in. He says, "Look, we've got to stop the excessive government spending. We've got to live within our means. We've got to even cut government spending." And what that does, it has a flow-on effect. If the government's not inventing money out of thin air, then what happens is the inflation comes out of control. And when inflation's down to a manageable 2 or 3%, just gives people confidence. They think, okay, well, I would like to start a business. You might even want to be a foreigner that wants to invest in that country, but it just gives you stability and confidence. Another bad thing about inflation, which most people don't realize, is puts everybody in a slightly, a 10%, 15% worse mood. People just walk around, aren't as happy. They're a bit grumpier. They might fight with their spouse a bit more. They might fight with their colleagues at work a bit more. They just be a little bit unhappier. That's the curse of inflation. So we need to we could easily reverse the inflation by massive Doge style cuts to get to all levels of government spending.
All right, major concern, housing and affordability. I know there's been a lot from the parties talking about partially stopping migration because we can't seem to build houses quick enough for the amount of people coming in. What is your stance on it? Is it going to be something similar to America where for you to actually get over there and become a citizen, you have to be able to do a job that there is a requirement for? Or is it, because I think ours is a bit more free, that you can just come over. Even we don't tailor down to the specific, professions that need those numbers. Where do you guys stand?
Okay, so I believe that a nation's immigration policy is the most important government decision, the most important policy. You just got to get it right. Okay, and the reason for that is, yes, high taxes are bad, but we can reverse them without too much difficulty. We can, yes, high regulations are bad, but we can reverse it. Okay. Now, if we happen to bring into a happy country people who just sort of not fitting in, and who happen to end up in jail disproportionately high, and it happen to end up on welfare disproportionately high, well, you bring people into the country like that, and what are you going to do? Kick them out of the country? That's pretty messy. Okay, so we'd much prefer not to get to that situation. Now, you look at parts of friggin' Western Europe now, and you think, oh my God, mainstream politicians are talking about deportations. That's really ugly. Okay, now, surely Australia should want to avoid even the possibility of us having to have that conversation in this country. Truth is, we don't really have ethnic violence in this country. I know there's a few little things happen there and there, but by and large, we're all getting along pretty well. Okay, and that's a good thing. Why risk it? When we look at Western Europe, it's just one bad thing happening after another. And all these, some of the great nations of history, Germany, France, Austria, the Netherlands, Great Britain, all these countries have got this massive social tension, okay? And it's just that. So I'm thinking what you described yesterday in your question about, yes, we want to head in that direction. The official Libertarian Party policy is it would result in about a 75% reduction in immigration, and it would be extremely focused on not just skilled people, but the precise type of the skills that we need. Okay, I was up at the mid-north coast of New South Wales recently, and I met a builder. He said, there's hundreds of people want to come and live here. It's beautiful. And I've got heaps of land, and I've got the materials. I just can't find anyone to be a builder, a bricklayer, electrician. I just can't find them. And I'm thinking, okay, good. Well, our policy would say that builder could sort of pay a high fee, something like $80,000, and he can go and get someone from Poland. He can get someone from any country he wants. He chooses who comes in here, not bureaucrats. He says, look, I need this dude, and I need him so much, I'm going to pay the government $80,000 to bring me this dude. Now, we know people are only going to pay $80,000 if they know that they're going to really add value, a lot more than $80,000. Now, so I support that policy. However, personally, my view is that I support the party's policy. I think it's a really good policy, but I would personally like to put a preface at the beginning, which is a 5-year immigration pause. Okay, and where we basically say Australia's been a very generous country. By and large, our immigrants have fitted in well. Okay, terrific. But we're going to have a pause. We've let in a very large number of refugees, and that's fine. Okay, but we just need to have a breather, because the native Australians, the people who've been here for a few generations, a lot of their kids can't buy a house in the suburb where they want to live in. So we would say, let's have a breather. Now, you can't be absolute about it. There will be some exceptions. Like if somebody wants to invest, $50 million in here, we'd be nuts to say, no, you can't come. Okay, so there'll be some people like that. There will also be, with a lot of countries, we have a roughly similar amount of people each year. We say like a 23-year-old Aussie girl falls in love with a guy from Canada, and she wants to go and live in Canada. Or sometimes that Canadian guy will want to come and live here. Now, we don't want to lose good people. And they might say, oh, well, since my Canadian husband can't come to Australia, we'll both go and live in Canada. Well, that would be better for us if they lived here. So when there's a country where we've had a history of roughly a similar amount of people leaving Australia to go there and a similar amount of people from that country to come here, where we say it's roughly equal, we would say, well, spousal visas are fine in that situation. Okay. And they'd probably, and look, there could be other exceptions. But generally, I believe a 5-year pause. Not only will we have the pause, Australia can have a public discussion about the future of our immigration program without being called racists. People can say what we can have our think tanks can think about it, our academics can think about it, our amazing journalists can think about it, our highly intelligent podcasters can think about it, and we can have a public discussion about it, about what's the best for the next 100 years in terms of Australia's immigration policy. And I think that would be a good thing because, as I said, Matt, I do believe it is the most important policy area. Everything else, we can fix up. If the unions get too much power, well, we can take the power away from them after the next election, okay? Even on free speech, okay? If they bring in laws against free speech, well, we can reverse that. We need to have it constitutionally protected, and that is really sacred. But the old immigration issue, if you get it right, it's fantastic for the country. If you bring in people, look, I remember reading in the Sydney Morning Herald about 20 years ago, I read that South Africans, white South Africans, and Hong Kong people come here and they've got about a 0.5% welfare dependency. And a large number of them start businesses and they just fit in. You don't see Hong Kong people or South African people, filling the jails. So I'm thinking, okay, well, if these people have proven to be terrific, and I'm sure there's lots of countries where we can say, the people that come from this country have been a serious net positive to the country. Okay, but I think we need to sort of have a breather and think about it. Now, during the 5-year pause, it may well be after 18 months, there'll be some industry out there that says, hey, our industry's falling apart because we're not getting migrants in a particular skill set. We don't have them here and we desperately need them. Well, we'd make exceptions for that. The good thing about the pause is we can end it. We can end it in total if we don't like it. We can end it for certain areas. Okay, but on the current trajectory, I fear we're heading towards Western European social tension, and I don't like it at all.
It's very funny. You mentioned earlier the Voice and the referendum that came from that. Whilst that was exorbitant in costing, it's fairly interesting that we don't have more of the community getting a say, doing it in a far better manner, maybe online or something like that, so it doesn't cost what it costs. But in regards to some of these major sort of decisions that we make, and I sort of appreciate that politicians are elected, but do they actually get a lot of information from people? I speak to a lot of people and they don't necessarily write or contact their politician or their local member to voice their concerns. They sort of just shut up and cop it. So it's really interesting coming from that perspective. Let's shift a little bit to, obviously, we are all about the outdoors. I love being outdoors. I want my kids to grow up outdoors. Then I'm starting to see one of the transitions is into the energy sector, and we are looking at renewables. We're looking at, if you're looking at snowy hydro, where we're demolishing bush to run lines and things like that. Where do you guys sit on that whole thing? Is it a bit leaning towards pro-nuclear? Is it going more renewables? Is it coal? Where do you guys sit?
Australia, has got this massive natural competitive advantage called abundant cheap energy, and it's a joint venture project between Labor and Liberal. Labor's worse, but Liberals aren't much better, of destroying it, okay, and hiking up our electricity prices. And electricity is the foundation of every single industry. There is no industry where you don't require a lot of fossil fuels. Okay, even if you just run a computer shop, well, you need to plug your computer shop in, don't you? To get the energy. So what we very, very strongly believe is very simple. We believe there should be a separation between the government and the energy industry. The government shouldn't have anything to do with the energy industry. So what we say is no subsidies, no bans. Now, if the renewables are as great as we're told, and I don't believe they are, I think they should be called the unreliables, but if they're as good as we're told they are, we'll let them compete in the free market. Okay, now with nuclear, we've got 1/3 of the world's uranium reserves, and we haven't even been looking for frigging uranium because we're not allowed to do much with it. So I think this nuclear, okay, is magnificent. Okay, I just can't believe how disgusting the left is in this country, attacking the nuclear industry. With all, it's like they're a supporter of a football team. Okay, it's like an irrational support for a football team, and they just come out with all these little talk. Oh, nuclear's this, nuclear's that, and we say, okay. The libertarians say, okay, well, look, if it's so uncompetitive, if it's so terrible, if it takes so long, well, why does the government have to ban it? Why do you have to put these bans in? Now, we're also pretty critical of the stupid Liberal Party because they want to spend. They won't tell us how much they want to spend, but it's reports of 200 billion to 600 billion. I mean, oh my God, that's a lot of money. And they're going to have government-owned nuclear power industries. What a load of crap that is. Okay, if we get out of the way, if we say to the world and local investors, we say, go for gold, whoever can deliver the cheapest energy, all the best to you. And nuclear power companies would come in here, and I believe we could have a magnificent, really cheap energy supply, which will just be so good for the whole economy. And, and if you happen to care about carbon dioxide emissions, which I don't, because I think carbon dioxide is the gas of life, the food of plants. But if you happen to care about it, well, then you should love the nuclear power plants. Nobody died in Fukushima. Now, that was a pretty bad nuclear disaster, yes, caused by a pretty serious earthquake/tsunami. No one died. Okay, that nuclear power plant, which was right on the ocean, copped the full brunt of a tsunami and an earthquake. No one died. Okay, so unfortunately, nuclear power industry, it's got the same first word in it that nuclear bombs have. Okay, I don't know why the marketing team didn't come up with, call it fission or whatever. I don't know the first thing about physics. Okay, but they could come up with better PR. But anyway, that's so yeah. We don't. Basically, I think the renewable thing is all hocus pocus and crap. And I think that nuclear is basically good, but it shouldn't be up to politicians or bureaucrats to determine our energy supply. A lot of libertarians do believe in the global warming orthodoxy. No problem. A lot of them don't. Okay, but even those that do, they say, well, they agree with those two principles: no bans, no subsidies. Government shouldn't be paying any favours. Get out of the way. Let all the energy sources compete. There may well be in 20, 30 years, Matt, some genius, Nobel Prize winner might have thought of a whole new way to make energy. Okay, these things, if we get the government out of the way, there'll be innovation and dynamism, and people think new inventions. And the best way to achieve that is to get the government out of the way. So very simple what the libertarian answer is there. And once again, Matt, we're right and everyone else is wrong.
A lot of things you're saying are making sense, and it just seems common sense sort of logic. And, I keep saying that nuclear is dangerous. Ansto out there at Lucas Heights, the reactor has been there for 70 years. We've had nothing really go wrong with it. And, I sort of sit there and go, I think the technology's probably got a little bit better in 70 years. Well, like everything. And then you look at things like Starlink and the NBN and things like that. So I do like where you're sitting and saying, we can look at some of these things and cut the waste. And I think that's really important. From access, because I know a big bugbear to a lot of outdoors people, shooters especially, is we've got great resources, national parks, very close. We are not allowed to get in there. What are you guys' stance on national parks? I mean, we're seeing more and more getting locked up. It's not something I'm really a fan of because I think that they are a public resource for everybody to use. I like to see people who do the right thing get rewarded. People that do the wrong thing, we need to hammer them and really make examples. Where do you guys think about the whole national parks and access to land?
I think it's really important for young Australian children to go and experience national parks when they're young. Because I remember when I saw these beautiful national parks, it was sort of like, it was just like I was in awe of these things. Okay. And there are 180 national parks in New South Wales as of today that are either closed or partially closed. Now, we had a petition recently here in the New South Wales Parliament, which Tony Crook helped us put together, and it was about 25,000 people signed it. I'm sure a lot of the people watching this podcast signed it, and that's the biggest petition this Parliament's had since the massive euthanasia debates. That's a big issue, and that called for a public inquiry to say, why the hell are so many national parks being shut down? Because what's happening is they are obfuscating. They aren't telling us. They aren't giving the public clarity. So there's a whole range of reasons. Now, I'm sure one or two of these reasons will be justified. Okay, the Wallamai pine is a very rare plant. Okay, it's still growing wildly there. And we don't want people going around tramping around looking at this Jurassic Park tree, okay, and so that's good, that's fine, but that's a very limited area, okay. And then we sometimes have to have a bit of closure for fire breaks and back burning, blah blah blah. But what's going on here at the heart of many in the left is that they are misanthropes. They hate people, okay, and they think people are bad, and they think nature untouched by evil mankind is pure and good. And so they want to increasingly hand over power to the national. They don't want people in the national parks, and I think it's bad for the health of the national parks because actually it probably increases fires, and also shooters can take out the feral animals, the deers and the foxes and the rabbits and the pigs. And dogs, wild dogs. That wasn't a thing when I was growing up. These wild dogs are pretty. And the wildcats are turning into little lions in some places, okay? So, do we want to let this keep going and kill all the native Australian animals? I don't think so. Now, so what we need to do is have clarity. Now, a lot of it has they don't want to tell us this, and again, it's a joint venture between Liberal and Labor, Aboriginal issues, okay? Now, look, the Libertarian Party is radically colour blind. We don't care about your family history or your skin colour. Now, if I have a close mate, I might be at a pub on a Sunday afternoon having a beer, and I will be curious. I'll say, tell us about your grandparents. I said, do you know anything about your great-grandparents? Only if they're a pretty close mate. I've got curiosity in my own family tree, just a little bit. It doesn't mean that much, does it? And I've got some curiosity in people that are socially close to me, okay, just out of interest, just incidentally. But why on earth should anyone's family tree give you special legal rights? Okay, I'll tell you who believes in that. Racists. You're giving that is the definition of a racist. You're giving people particular rights not because of their content of their character, because of the colour of their skin and because of their family tree. So we're radically opposed to that. We believe in individuals. Now, and they've at budget estimates last year, I asked them in National Parks and Wildlife, I said, look, I've heard a rumour that you're going to try and, over time, hand over all the national parks to sort of Aboriginal freehold / joint management with national parks. And one of the very senior bureaucrats said, yeah, that is the plan. That is, he did not deny it. He was sheepish about it, but he did not deny that's the plan. So, look, we're just gearing up on this front, okay, because we want to absolutely reclaim our national parks and our state forests. And you know what? This is another case of the government doesn't like talking about it. The bureaucrats are just doing this out of public view because there'll be riots in the streets, or there'll be protests in the streets at least, if people hear about this, okay? This is when the government wants to do something bad, I've worked out, they make a city hill at 4 o'clock in the morning, something that they know the public will hate, like all this transgender stuff, all this transgender extremism. They made a city till 7 o'clock in the morning. They just wanted it done and dusted. They didn't want the public to know about it. And the legacy media wasn't interested in reporting on it. Okay, but everyone would have been pretty shocked with what the laws are in that front now. And they recently did it with hate speech laws. They made it sit all night. They know it's not popular. Now they're doing this with the bloody national parks, which drives me mad. And so hopefully we're going to have a debate on it shortly, and hopefully we can have an inquiry and get people along and say, why there's 180 national parks. I'd like to ask the bureaucrats, okay, why is this one shut? Why is this one shut? Go through them one after another. I was up at Mount Warning a year ago, beautiful Mount Warning, okay? And, it's as far as mountains go, you don't normally describe a mountain as charismatic, but that is a charismatic mountain. You can see it from a long way away. Captain Cook saw it, in 1770. Uh, and the whole thing's been shut down. At first, it was shut down because of COVID, but that was all BS. Now they're going to hand it. They're going to say that only Aboriginal men of a certain tribe are allowed to access that because of Dreamtime stories, which I'm very sceptical of.
Very interesting stuff. Just before we wrap it up, why politics? It's something that fascinates me. Why anyone would want to get into this and trade and back and forth and have the arguments, and it must take a lot of time and effort. I feel that there would be very little reward because someone's going to hate you somewhere. How did that happen?
Look, it is an interesting subject about why certain people, it's a small percentage of the population, do get attracted to being on the front line of politics. Okay, it seems to be this sort of random gene that just sort of pops up in people's lives, because very often you can have highly political parents, but the kids are not interested in politics, and you can have parents who aren't interested in politics and their kids aren't interested in politics, but one of them is. Okay, so now it could easily just be circumstances. I like to think or I tend to think it might be sort of there's some little DNA, there's a warrior DNA in things. So you would have probably seen the movie Braveheart, in Scotland in the 1300s, where the men are out there, charging at each other with axes and everything. Okay, well, most men in Scotland and England weren't involved in battles like that. Okay, only a small number found themselves at the front line to be involved in that. And that is sort of like what politics is. And some people, and mates of mine who I know are interested in politics, a lot of them, just at the age of 7 or 8, they were just sort of interested in watching the nightly news and saying, what's going on? Why is that? And asking their parents, who's this person? What does that party stand for? And, so that's just, it has been a lifelong sort of interest. My views on subjects have changed, but I think that is a healthy thing. And because people who don't change, so many people who are involved in politics professionally, it's like what I was saying before, it really feels like they're supporting a football team. Red team's good, blue team's bad. And like when I was 7 years old, there was a rugby league grand final on, and it was between the Cronulla Sharks and Manly Sea Eagles, and it was a tie, and I was going for Cronulla for some reason because I like the colour blue. I had no connection with the Shire, and it was a tie, and so it was really dramatic. It's the first year I've got into it following rugby league, and then it went into extra time, and it was still a tie. Then I had to replay the game. Anyway, so since then I've just had this irrational sort of love for the Cronulla Sharks. Now, I've got no connection with the Shire. I've never lived anywhere near there. Okay, I barely know anybody from the Shire, and I'm not even massively interested in rugby league these days. But I think the Sharkies are playing actually while we recorded this. But I will. I just sort of want to watch them. But it's just this irrational. It's like when we're growing up with evolution. You would have loved your tribe and hated the tribe over the other side of the mountain. So, and that's what a lot of political people are like. They just support their tribe. Okay, it's like with the nuclear industry. All these geniuses on the left, they're just like trotting out all these lines. What's wrong with nuclear? What's wrong with nuclear? Okay, they don't really think about what's best for the country. So, so they're the people to avoid in politics. The people who sort of say, who just go along with their team. They just sort of because they want to get promoted in their party.
Look, that I can completely agree with you. I'm always talking on here about I'm a lifelong learner. I have a growth mindset, and it's funny how I see people refer to it in politics. Someone flip-flops or changes their position. I think that's actually the sign of intelligence, that you can be presented different information that questions your own beliefs, and you're smart enough to be able to pick holes in your own argument and see maybe it's a change in where you fall. So I appreciate your honesty about that. John, finally, what's the message out there for people who may be sitting on the fence of who to vote for?
Well, look, if you're in you got a national podcast. I would ask people to have a look into the Libertarian Party. And the best way to help us with your vote is to vote number 1 for us in the Senate. Also helps in the lower house, but in the Senate. Now, if you are inclined to vote for us, then please do put other good minor parties below us, but above Liberal and Labor. Look, the Libertarians have got a saying amongst us, and that is that everyone agrees with us. When there's a really contentious thing, everyone agrees with us, but they usually take 10 years to catch up. Okay. The Libertarians are, when the global financial crisis happens, and the United States in particular spent endless billions, probably trillions, bailing out bad Wall Street banks, and everyone said, "Oh, well, we've got to do that, or the financial system will implode." The Libertarians said, "Look, let those reckless banks go bust. Everyone's got to learn a lesson, okay? We can pick up the pieces and move on. If we go and get the public into debt, the government into debt, it's just going to bog everything down, okay?" And that's exactly right. Now, we were right on the global financial crisis. After 9/11, the Libertarians were saying, "Hey, we've got a better idea than going bombing the hell out of the Middle East," and that would be this. The day after 9/11, the US Secretary of State, Colin Powell, could have flown into Kabul. Now, I know that they were a pack of pricks there, the Taliban, but we could have sat down with the Taliban and said, "Look, you've obviously seen what's happened on the news. It's not real good. We're pretty cranky at the moment. Option one is we invade you and try and find Osama ourselves. Option two is here's $10 billion to whoever can catch Osama, and they can have 50 passports to the United States for them and their mates." Osama would have been found in about 10 days, okay? And then we could have given them the money. We all moved on. We wouldn't have had to waste all that money. But left and right in the mainstream political parties, they said, "Let's go to forever war. Let's go to forever war," okay? All because of 9/11, okay? We could have got Osama, put him on trial in New York, found him guilty, and executed him. Over. Then we wouldn't have to put up with, the threat of jihadist terrorism, okay? So we were right about that. The Libertarians were right on frigging COVID, okay? As soon as COVID started, February 2020, Libertarians all around the world, and everyone's losing their mind. John Howard, fell for it 100%. Everyone fell for it. Libertarians are saying, well, firstly, it's not that serious. And secondly, we can cope, okay? We don't need lockdowns. We don't need to pay people to stay at home. And we certainly don't need to force warp speed vaccines on people. Okay, so we just see everything, Libertarians see everything through one prism. What will make the government smaller? Because the government's dangerous. The government will get things wrong. So that's where the Libertarians, look, the party that we probably have the most in common with is Pauline Hanson's One Nation. And we like Pauline and we like One Nation, okay? But what's the difference? Pauline says this: yes, it's all bad. If you vote for good politicians, we'll turn it around. The Libertarians say, look, we want you to vote for us, but we're not going to turn it around because we're any better than them. We're going to turn it around because we're going to be like Harvey Millet. We're going to make the government a hell of a lot smaller, get the government out of your life, and your life will be a lot more prosperous and dynamic without the government bossing you around all the time and taxing you to death.
Love it. I'm all about free choice. Get all the information and you make a decision, not be forced into it. So I think that's a really good way to wrap it up. John, I really appreciate your time, and best of luck in the upcoming election. I'm very keen to see how your party and the rest of it all plays out. So thanks for coming on.
It was a real honour, Matt. I enjoyed the conversation. Thanks for having me.
Okay. All right, listeners. Bye for now.